Welcome to School for Relationships. We are here today to talk about intimacy. We all need it, and some of us admit that we want it. Some people even want it so badly they will do almost anything to get it. And a lot of other people avoid intimacy though, and are actually deeply afraid of intimacy. So, what is it that so many people are afraid of when it comes to intimacy? Many people associate intimacy with losing something, losing themselves, their freedom, the safety of casualness. In intimate relationships, many people end up feeling trapped and consumed by that relationship or the other person. And intimacy raises the stakes of a relationship. When we're intimate with someone, we have more to lose, we're more exposed, and we feel a whole new level of obligation to consider the other person's feelings and preferences. So yes, we all need intimacy, but when does too much of a good thing turn bad? Consciously or unconsciously, many people associate intimacy with the feeling of enmeshment. That is the second video I'll be doing in this series. This video is setting us up for that. And the key to understanding enmeshment, what I will say about it now, is to think of every relationship as a balancing act. How can we find the balance between being intimate with another person and staying fully ourselves in that relationship? How can we connect deeply with others while still taking better care of ourselves and our needs than ever before? As we seek to find this balance, we can start by looking at this thing that polarizes so many people. Even within one person, many of us alternate back and forth between longing for intimacy and then shrinking or running away from it when we get close. What is intimacy then? And love it or hate it, why does it matter? Intimacy is about the quality of our relationships. Specifically, it's about how much closeness and trust we have in our relationships and how openly we're able to share our thoughts and feelings with each other. And there are different ways we can become close to another person, so there are also many different types of intimacy: physical, emotional, intellectual, spiritual, creative. And one of the essential features of intimacy, and part of what makes it so daunting, is that this closeness and openness in sharing our thoughts and feelings has to be reciprocal. And the reciprocal nature of intimacy places it on the scary list of things outside of my control, and is one of the big reasons why so many people avoid intimacy. Even if we take the risk of opening up and exposing ourselves to another person, that person always has a choice about whether to reciprocate. And even when two people have been in a relationship for a very long time, at any point in time, each person has the right to make a different choice about how involved they want to be in that relationship, or whether they want to remain involved in that relationship at all. When it comes to intimacy, the one thing we can control is how we show up in the relationship. We can't control the other person's feelings or choices, even though some of us may try to. So being in relationship with others involves navigating and balancing everyone's needs and preferences, which can change at any time. And this is a part of what makes intimacy so stressful. In Gabor Mate's book, The Body Says No, he identifies the 3 things that cause humans the most stress as uncertainty, lack of information, and the loss of control. Intimacy involves facing all 3 of our biggest stressors. There's uncertainty because things in relationship can always change, and there's a loss of control that we have over someone else's feelings and preferences. And despite how important intimacy is for our health and happiness, most of us have never actually been taught what intimacy is or how to engage in it. And this can leave us floundering with a huge lack of information on how to actually build and maintain intimacy. Basically, we fear what we don't know. So our lack of education on intimacy makes it seem a lot scarier than it actually is. And given how stressful, uncertain, and volatile intimacy is, pretending to be self-sufficient feels like the safer choice for many. But what happens when we choose to avoid intimacy? What do we have to lose? And what happens for people who don't choose to avoid intimacy, but don't know how to go about creating it? If we haven't learned how to build and maintain closeness with others, intimacy may not feel like a choice at all. It can feel totally out of our control. And so while some people intentionally avoid intimacy, others may recognize that they want it, but feel completely stuck on how to get there. For a lot of people, intimacy can feel like a game of luck that depends more on who we're physically surrounded by or close to than who we would actually choose and want to get emotionally close to. So whether you claim not to want it but don't know how to get there, or are intentionally seeking intimacy, almost everyone has strong feelings about intimacy, one way or the other. Even apathy is a strong feeling. And we have such strong feelings about intimacy because of how much it matters. So now that we've defined intimacy and you've had some time to reflect on your own feelings about it, let's actually talk about why it matters. As humans, intimacy matters both for our survival and for our sense of life as meaningful and worthwhile. Our brain and body develop the way they do in large part because of our first intimate relationships, and how we then operate and respond to the experiences of our lives is largely determined by our first experiences of intimacy with our parents or our adult caregivers. So our intimate relationships in childhood and into our adulthood shape the way the neurological pathways in our brain wire and fire together, and determine how our nervous system and body responds to everything that happens to us. Because of this, intimate relationships are one of the biggest factors that influence both our physical and mental health and how we feel every day of our lives. Intimate relationships help us grow to become the adults that we are, and are one of the main ways that we continue learning, growing, and developing as adults. Without the growth and sense of support that intimacy brings us, we engage in less healthy habits, are more prone to disease developing and worsening, and are at a higher risk of dying earlier. Failure to connect intimately with others is also one of the biggest reasons bringing people to outpatient therapy. Without intimate relationships, understanding and accepting ourselves is a lot harder, and we struggle to see ourselves clearly. This is because the closest people in our lives serve as mirrors to us. And when we're around people who reflect back understanding and acceptance, it's also easier to see ourselves with less judgment and to build a sense of ourselves as worthy, capable, and supported. Given this, intimacy isn't just something that improves our relationships with others, it improves our relationship with ourselves. This makes intimacy one of the biggest factors that contributes to our happiness and overall satisfaction in life. So recognizing intimacy as both one of the most important factors in our quality of life and one of the most stressful life experiences helps us see why intimacy brings up such strong feelings for people. Along with the stress that comes with uncertainty and a loss of control, many people struggle with never having learned how to engage in intimacy in a way that feels safe and good for them. Again, we fear what we don't know. And for some people, their biggest barrier is opening up and sharing their thoughts and feelings with others. For others, opening up and connecting to people may feel relatively easy, but they struggle with maintaining their own sense of self in their close relationships. For these people, connecting intimately with others can feel like trading in their freedom and individuality. This can make intimate relationships feel heavy and suffocating. And I'll talk a lot more about what drives this type of fear of intimacy again in my next video when we delve into enmeshment. For now, let's start with the people who feel stuck on how to even get started with building intimacy. Going back to our definition of intimacy, intimacy is the quality of how much closeness and trust we have in our relationships and how openly we're able to communicate our thoughts and feelings to each other. I'm going to start with the second piece of this definition, the ability to openly communicate our thoughts and feelings, which is already where a lot of people get stuck. If we haven't learned how to name and manage our own emotions, expressing our emotions to others can feel like an impossibly daunting task. There's so much awareness that goes into how we're feeling, understanding what's making us feel that way, and knowing how to cope with our feelings. If we don't know how we're really feeling, we may try to share our feelings and thoughts with others, but we may not even be sharing something that captures our true experience. Let's say, for example, we have a strong feeling coming up we don't fully understand or feel in control of. We may label that feeling as anger if this is the only language we've been taught and feel comfortable with. But maybe what we're actually feeling is sad and powerless. And even if the other person is trying their best to understand us, if we tell them we're angry, but we're really sad, they're going to struggle to respond in ways that meet our authentic needs. And we may leave that conversation not feeling as understood or supported because we haven't learned how to understand our own feelings. So in order to be authentic opening up with other people, we first need to practice naming and navigating our feelings for ourselves. And we don't have to be perfect at this. We can keep building that self-awareness in relationships with others, but it is no one's job but our own to try to understand and take care of our feelings. And if we weren't taught how to name and manage our emotions, especially the big and painful ones, we may live trying to avoid these feelings as much as possible. Let's say we haven't been taught that our feelings are valid and important. If we haven't been taught that we're capable of handling big feelings, and that feelings, no matter how big they are temporary, we might end up avoiding our feelings as much as we can. What happens here is when we avoid our feelings, we're really avoiding ourselves and our own inner world. Instead, we may lose ourselves in external distractions and be chasing this endless pursuit of escapism, stimulation, seeking pleasure, and avoiding pain. And it's only by journeying into the inner world of our thoughts and feelings that we have something authentic and genuine to share about ourselves with others. Otherwise, what we're sharing is not ourselves, but experiences. And while sharing experiences can create intimacy, it's oftentimes not enough for us to feel fully seen and known in our relationships. So along with how people are taught or not taught to understand and manage their emotions, we see a whole range of how people are taught or not to express their thoughts and feelings. One tool that I love that breaks down the different ways we learn to express ourselves is the Intercultural Communication and Conflict Inventory, or ICS for short. ICS focuses on two main aspects of how we learn to communicate and resolve conflict with others. The first is how directly or indirectly we communicate our thoughts and feelings. And the second is how emotionally constrained or closed off we are when we speak versus how emotionally open and expressive we are when we communicate. Starting with an indirect communication style, this person may generally avoid naming their thoughts and feelings directly to others. They may use more ambiguous language, oftentimes relying on third parties or even gossip to communicate important information. And they may have a hard time voicing or elaborating on their own opinions and struggle to get to the point. And an indirect communication style does not have to be a barrier to intimacy, but it means that building intimacy relies more on being sensitive to unspoken, nonverbal cues, or to the use of storytelling and metaphors to express our feelings, or even on, again, third parties that are expressing our feelings and mediating conflict for us. The biggest risk I see with indirect communication is just a higher chance of misunderstandings. But some of the strengths that come with an indirect communication style is it's often centered around maintaining harmony in relationships, and it can involve a lot of skillfulness in how people use humor, storytelling, hyperbole, and metaphor to express themselves. Let's now look at an emotionally restrained communication style. I'm going to start off with someone who expresses themselves using direct language, but is emotionally constrained or closed off. So a direct, emotionally restrained communicator builds trust with others through candor and saying what you mean. This person may connect mostly on the basis of intellect and ideas, and they can prioritize calm and rational conversations as their preferred way of connecting to others. So people who prefer this direct, emotionally restrained way of communicating may enjoy intellectual debates and arguments, but feel much more uncomfortable with emotional exchanges and have some difficulty reading in between the lines. Finally, let's talk about someone who's learned to express themselves directly and with emotional openness. I'm not going to lie, this communication style does make building intimacy with others more straightforward a lot of the time. When it comes to opening up to other people, this person is more comfortable sharing their thoughts and feelings. But while emotionally open and direct communication may be the straightest path to intimacy, it isn't the only path. A very direct and open communicator still has to be careful to not dominate conversations and to remain attentive to other people's different communication preferences. So more than me trying to hold up direct and emotionally open communication is the easier or better way to create intimacy, the main thing I care about is us being aware and flexible in how we communicate. No one communication style is always going to be the best fit for every specific situation or relationship. And the differences in how we learn to open up to others do not have to be a problem or a barrier to intimacy. Quite the opposite. Connecting with others who think, feel, and express themselves in different ways than us is a part of what makes relationships so rewarding and expansive and exciting and such an amazing place for growth. So the main time that different communication styles can become a barrier to intimacy is number one, when we're not aware of our own communication style, and therefore also maybe not aware of how other people prefer to communicate. And two, if we become overly rigid in our preferred communication style and lose some flexibility in communicating with different types of people. So again, our work isn't necessarily to change our communication style, but just to become aware of it. Even if you start off pretty rigid in your preferred communication style, how we communicate is learned. We can always learn new skills and ways to communicate with others. And a lot of how we get to learn and practice these skills is in relationships with people who are different than us. We do not have to show up to these relationships having already perfected our communication skills. We just need a dedication to building our self-awareness and that flexibility to learn and grow. And building our self-awareness gives us more choice in how we connect with others. It allows us to be more understanding towards others and creates that openness that is so essential for building trust and closeness. So coming back to the bigger picture of what intimacy is, well, what about trust? What is it and how do we build it? Trust is about how much we can depend on someone to do what they say they'll do, to follow through, and not to hurt us. And one thing that I like about how the American Psychological Association defines trust is they recognize that the key factor in building trust isn't necessarily how honest someone is, but how predictable they are. And there are two things I think we can learn from APA's definition. Number one, trustworthiness is more about integrity than it is about honesty. Being honest and transparent helps us build trust, but what matters more is how much we can count on someone to act on what they say. The second thing I think we can learn is that trust involves making a prediction, specifically about how much we can rely on another person. No matter how much we think we can rely on another person, trust always involves taking a gamble. And the inherent riskiness of trust makes it one of the bravest things we can do. And it's also something we should do with our eyes wide open. So while some people struggle to ever fully trust others, others automatically extend trust and the benefit of the doubt without having taken the time to make their own informed choice and prediction about who is deserving of their trust and how much. And when we extend trust as if it were a given, this is usually because we may not have been taught to trust our own intuition and perception of other people. Basically, we haven't been taught how to make more accurate predictions about others, or that we should trust and strengthen these predictions. So what helps us make more accurate predictions about who we can trust? Time and information. The more time we spend with someone and the more we see them in different contexts, especially stressful ones, the more accurate our predictions become about how much we can rely on them. Along with time, the other way we come to understand people goes back to how we create closeness in relationships, sharing our thoughts and feelings with each other. As people share more of their thoughts and feelings, we have more chances to see if they're acting in alignment with what they say. And this process of building trust isn't something we usually get to do and safely watch along the sidelines. Opening up and creating trust is a mutual process, which is again part of what makes trust so scary. Yet even as we gently push at the edges of our comfort zone in trusting other people, we still have the right to open up in the time and way that feels safe for us, and to let time do a lot of the work in helping us feel seen and in seeing other people. Through this process and with time, we get to see past the public persona that we present to others into the multi-layered human underneath. Seeing someone in their struggles and imperfections is where intimacy with another person really begins. And this greater intimacy also gives us a clear vision on how compatible we are with that other person and helps us make choices about how we want to be in relationship with them, how much we want to invest of our time and energy. And as we continue learning more about the other person, trust, like intimacy, can wax and wane even in the same relationship. And trust coming and going, and intimacy coming and going, doesn't mean that anything is wrong with the relationship, and is oftentimes actually a sign of growth. That's because trust isn't a static experience or a final destination. It's something we continue to build and maintain throughout our relationships. And it involves learning about the other person just as much as it involves learning about ourselves. Because trust involves making predictions about another person, one of the first things that gets damaged when our trust is broken is our trust in our own ability to make accurate predictions about others. And this can leave us feeling disoriented, confused, and afraid. And a lot of the initial pain that can come from having our trust broken sometimes comes from us blaming ourselves for having made the wrong judgment call on that person. And being wrong about someone is scary because it involves all three of our biggest stressors: uncertainty, lack of information, and a loss of control. Healing the damage of broken trust often involves trying to gain back a sense of inner control through gathering more information to create a clearer vision of what happened and why. And this process of healing and gathering more information can help us to decide to re-engage with the other person and to start that mutual work of rebuilding trust. And it can also help us decide which ruptures don't feel worth repairing. No matter what we decide in regards to our relationships with the other person, the one thing that remains constant is our relationship with ourselves. Creating trust with others starts with building trust in ourselves and our own intuition, feelings, and perceptions. So again, the main ingredients to intimacy are opening up to others, communicating our thoughts and feelings, and building trust. And this barely does justice to how complex, rich, and varied of an experience intimacy can be. But before we lose ourselves in how complicated intimacy can be, we have to remember that our ability to intimately connect with others is innate. As babies, we intuitively and reflexively know our needs and feelings, and we use any means at our disposal to express them. We're also wired to be deeply sensitive and in tune with the people around us. We're born with this incredible capacity to open ourselves up to others and to learn from how they respond to us. This innate sensitivity allows us to also pick up on the fears of the adults around us, even unconscious or unspoken fears. And then as children, we can come to internalize and learn and pick up on some of these fears that were modeled for us, many of which were also learned and intergenerational. These learned fears that we pick up are what make intimacy feel so daunting and unapproachable. And they can make us forget our natural skills in connecting with others and block us from continuing to strengthen these skills. But anything that is learned can be unlearned, and what is innate can always be remembered. In the process of rebuilding the skills that allow us to experience intimacy, we also get to connect more intimately with ourselves than ever before. As we've seen, opening up with others starts with getting to know ourselves and our own thoughts and feelings, and trusting others starts with trusting ourselves. But we don't have to do all of this on our own. We can learn more about ourselves in relationships with others, especially in the emotionally safe ones that serve as mirrors where we get to experience seeing and being seen. In this way, any intimate relationship always brings us closer to ourselves. And most of the struggles we have with intimacy come back to ways that we are struggling to be in relationship with ourselves. As we further explore enmeshment, the specific struggle we'll dive into is the struggle to remain fully ourselves in intimate relationships. So that's what's coming up next in this series. Tune back in for that, and let me know in the comments section of this video what resonated to you from how I talked about intimacy today, and what, if anything, you would want to add. Thanks for tuning in, and see you in the next video.